The last section with just a few basic questions about general React Native development. We can talk about new architecture, we can talk about multi-platform, but at the end of the day, we all create some kind of React Native code, and we solve some maybe challenging or typical daily problems with React Native. So maybe we can start with that one. What was the biggest or the latest performance challenge or that you have faced at your job, and how did you solve that, and what were the takeaways from it? We can start with Ram.
Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, it's performance. There's no reason I wouldn't take it. So on the React Native performance part, I think, and this is also what prompted me to do the talk at React Native EU. I think the mistake I made was I kind of was talking about like native performance and improving native performance over and over again. But one of the things that I realized is that there's also a ton of like performance issues in the JavaScript side of the world. So the latest performance issue that I had was around like JavaScript thread being super busy. And as you know, you can like spawn many threads on the native side. There are a lot of solutions there, but on JavaScript, there is not much. And if if your JavaScript thread is busy, if you click a button, it shows. Like you can actually see that the JavaScript button click does not go through. And I was trying to understand like what happens. And I think to your question about what is the issue was the JavaScript thread was slow, and I had no clue how to solve it. I also discovered that the JavaScript profilers used to work with JSC and are broken on Hermes. And we have an internal tool that we were able to use to like get the sampling profiler running. That's when I also realized that there's nothing exists in the open source. And luckily for me, we had the MLH fellowship program, which is a program to bring in new students and new contributors into React Native and get them to build stuff. I was actually super lucky to get into that the project got accepted into MLH, and we had two really talented students build the visualization for the Hermes sampling profiler in open source. So I'm hoping that just like me, if people are also facing like issues with JavaScript performance, that's one tool that will come in handy that people can use and build.
Nice. And by the way, Ram, I have to say here that recently I've been working on the startup performance of my Android app, and I had an issue with React markers and systrace, and I found some articles of yours, describing how to set it up with some kind of custom code hosted on Gist, how to make it work. And I was just, so glad that you did the hard work before, because it was such a time saver. So I just wanted to thank you for doing this, as we are, talking about performance right now. All right, Monica, I think you wanted to say something as well about the challenge that you had at Major League Soccer. You're working on a product, I think, so there might be some interesting problems that you're facing every day.
Yeah, there are actually multiple performance, gaps and challenges that we are faced with all the time. But the one that when I was thinking about this question, that came up to my mind, because it's like, I guess the most challenging that we have had in the recent time has been our massive upgrade of our app. We were, just like trying to migrate to Android X, which again, sounds like to be something way behind, but because we have a lot of like libraries that we depend on and like so much of like native code, we were just recently doing it. And after doing this, just the upgrading of some of our major libraries, like React Navigation, for instance, made the process of migrating overall very challenging, especially because we had some libraries that were already considered legacy code and had kind of like changed everything internally. So this particularly forced us to think about ways to solve issues like total incompatibility with the new APIs, right? So like the whole process, which led us to have great increases in performance, was definitely something that every person who's developing in native always has to face. And I think it was important to bring it up here, because we also face it at MLS, having a bunch of engineers working on it and just being an app that we have developed for quite a long time already.
Yeah, totally agree. And actually this, I think, brings me to the next question, which I can ask you as well as a follow-up from the migration perspective, because there's a lot of companies are migrating to React Native right now from a variety of different apps. small ones and big ones, one platform, many platforms, and they are also trying to transition from native developers to JavaScript developers, which is also a challenge on its own. So I guess my question would be, what would be the biggest challenge that you would say might be here, and what would be the advice for somebody who's looking to start doing this as we speak?
And you mean to start like building up React Native applications?
Yeah, just trying to migrate from the existing apps to React Native. So you say you have like two or maybe like you have an app, native app, and you're about to migrate it. So that's a intermediate brownfield app that's eventually gonna be greenfield, hopefully when they are ready.
Oh, there are many things that we have to take into account, but I think dividing the process in chunks is perhaps the smartest thing to do, as well as determining compatibility from the libraries and like all of the parts of your app with, in this case, React Native, but everything that we're trying to develop. Sometimes, and what we have found out so far is like, of course, React Native is amazing and we love working with it, but there are things that are still we need to kind of like tweak and move around so we are compatible with some of the libraries for third-party providers that are not working with a React Native mind. And then this kind of goes with what Ram and Kudo were talking before about, like, they don't, and I guess everybody, they're not, all the libraries are not just like the same thing competing for the same, and in other languages as well. Just like, so I guess understanding what are the limitations and capabilities of like the libraries that you have on the native side, and then what are the limitations and capabilities that React Native offers is like a perfect starting point for everything.
Yeah, I would agree definitely with that. When we started converting the Artsy app, I think for a lot of people it is very tempting to want to think about JavaScriptifying all of it as soon as possible, but that I would say that is not really necessary, and you can probably focus on other things first. Also, there's some cases where you, depending on the company, where you will want to keep native code anyways, and which actually, this conversion, the Artsy app, is so long ago that I don't know how much it really applies to technically to companies nowadays. Actually, that is my React Native EU talk about, so you can just look that up on YouTube. But it's more interesting, I think. I don't know if you were hinting at that, Mike, but obviously it's not just a technological thing, right? It's working with people, with developers, and I've had many conversations with companies where they try or they consider introducing React Native, and we actually now that we're talking about it, actually remember from Artsy, a few people did a conference at Facebook, a small conference which is Artsy x React Native on YouTube, and my colleague Maxime did a great talk about learning how to learn, which is more about the psychology of developers that and considering that aspect, as she was, when I introduced React Native, and how I did not necessarily truly considered all of the aspects, how that affects a native engineer, how they suddenly are dropped into something new, how their specific skills are, how do they fit in. I think in the end, at Artsy, that was a good mix where we now have the ability to have a lot more people working, more product teams working on the application, but we definitely always tried to embed a native expert into each of these teams to ensure that we have the quality that we're looking for. But it's not something that you can just take for granted or just consider like, oh, yeah, it's easy win budget-wise, let's just switch to JavaScript. That's probably a recipe for disaster if you have a larger team of native developers.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. Actually, this is something that we run many times when we are working with clients. They're about to do this transition. Technology is one thing, but then trying to kind of get into the existing organization where there are native developers, different teams. For first, you have to sell them React Native as well and kind of demonstrate the benefits of that. And this becomes a challenging task on its own. So I guess as soon as everybody's on board, you can say that you have some kind of success already achieved.